There we go. I hope everybody can see that. Um, and so ergonomics, I know all of you on the call are familiar with the basics of ergonomics, what it is. But I'm going to give a little bit of a twist to the discussion today and present some ergonomic issues, how to look at ergonomics and how it relates to um, livestock management injuries. But then also I'm going to talk a little bit about fatalities and the role of ergonomics in that. I'm going to have a little bit of a discussion at the very end about worker training. And so here's the logo of the High Cause located at Colorado State University. And I'll provide the contact information for High Cause at the very end, as well as my contact information as well. And going back to kind of explain my background, so as it relates to this presentation, my background, I'm a physical therapist. I'm a licensed physical therapist, and I practiced for many years before deciding to move to Fort Collins and pursuing a Ph.D. in occupational health and safety. But from a clinical perspective, I primarily focused on work-related musculoskeletal disorders, and we're going to talk about that in here. My background also includes a management degree, and then my PhD from Colorado State is in basically occupational health and safety with a focus on ergonomics. And so it was my time at Colorado State where I was introduced to this High Cause. This is a federally funded agricultural health and safety research center that receives federal funding to address agricultural health and safety issues. And it was my work with High Cause that introduced me to agricultural health and safety. And it is there where I was provided the opportunity and the platform to begin my research in ag health and safety. Most of my research is in livestock production, more specifically in the dairy industry. And my research, my projects is very much driven by what the industry tells me their needs are as it relates to health and safety. So I partner with producers, I partner with associations, and you inform me and High Cause as to what we need to be focusing our attention on. What are the pressing issues? And one of those is livestock-related injuries, fatalities. And so we've conducted a number of different research projects. I've got one looking at worker fatigue among dairy parlor workers, where we are not only measuring the impact of fatigue on the worker, but also their performance. Because we cannot look at these strictly in a health and safety and silo. We have to look at how health and safety may also impact a worker's performance. We look at issues like total worker health. We look at safety management, safety leadership. We just published a few papers on how to effectively address safety leadership and management among frontline dairy farm supervisors and how it affects their safety leadership behavior, as well as its impact on safety, climate, and culture. So for the purposes of today, though, we're going to talk about livestock management and ergonomics. And so here are some of the objectives that I hope that you get out of this, is to understand the current situation, injury situation in agriculture, what those ergonomic related risk factors are for the development of musculoskeletal disorders, work-related musculoskeletal disorders, and then the risk factors that may be related to fatal injuries in agriculture, and more specifically livestock operations. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about training issues, what OSHA does say about training of workers. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of ergo, let's kind of take a step back and let's look at the current situation in agriculture production and what the Bureau of Labor Statistics, what it says. This is the agency within the federal government that collects injury, illness, and fatality data across industries. And so this is the most recent data that is published. This is for the year of 2023. And this is the number of non-fatal injuries across different industrial sectors. In agriculture, forestry, and fishing is right here in the top. Our federal government, they as far as industrial sectors, they group ag, forestry, and fishing and hunting together. But as it relates to the actual number of non-fatal work injuries, it's very low in relation to other industrial sectors. Healthcare, hospitals, healthcare delivery historically has the highest raw number of injuries. But this is really not an apples to apples comparison. In order to do that, you have to look at rates and the number of workers within each sector. And so when we do that, when we put the raw number of injuries, non-fatal injuries on top, and then the total number of workers on the bottom, you see that ag, forestry, and fishing jumps to the top. Unfortunately, historically, the ag, forestry, and fishing sector ranks at the top or among the top 1, 2, or 3 as it relates to non-fatal work-related injury rates. And so also, if we look at fatal injuries, look at the raw number of fatal injuries across these different industrial sectors. Ag, forestry, and fishing is kind of in the middle. But again, we have to normalize it and look at the total number of workers in each of these sectors. And when we do that and we come up with a rate, ag, forestry, and fishing is number 1 as it relates to workplace fatal injuries, unfortunately. And this is a reality that we have been dealing with for several decades. Ag, forestry, and fishing historically has the top non-fatal as well as fatal injury rates across all industrial sectors. Now, there are certain subcomponents, some sectors within those industries, like forestry is the driver of fatalities in the ag, forestry, and fishing sector. But livestock operations has a very high representation as it relates to injuries and fatalities. Okay, so now let's jump into a little bit about the terminology. What is ergonomics? Well, first of all, I'll tell you what it is not. Back when I first started my doctoral studies at Colorado State University, my mom, my late mother, bless her heart, did not know what ergonomics was, but she was all excited to call me up one day and say, I figured out what ergonomics is, because she was at Dillard's and she was buying bras and she found an ergonomically designed bra. And so for a long time now, she thought I was designing women's undergarments, and that's not the case. And so I had to continuously remind her that that's not what I did. But by definition, ergonomics, when you break it down, ergos means work and nomos means law. So basically the term of ergonomics means the study of work. And that's what I do. That's what we do in the field of ergonomics. We study how people work with the intent of identifying what are the issues that may cause injuries, what are the issues or risk factors, as we call them, may lead to catastrophic events like a fatality. And so that's just one of the objectives. But also we look at other issues like how might we improve that interface between the worker and their working environment, or the machines that they are operating, or as it relates to this discussion, working with animals. How might we improve that interface? How might we improve the worker's productivity? How might we improve the worker's efficiency? And so all of those factors come into play as we investigate ergonomic issues in livestock management. How can we put the worker in the best position to be a productive worker, to be a successful worker, to be an efficient worker, but then also protecting their health and safety in the process? So here's some more definitions: the study of work laws, the designing of for people, fitting the job to the worker rather than fitting the worker to the job. And so there's a number of different definitions there. Okay, so the purpose of what we try to do is to improve the performance of systems by improving the human-machine interaction. That system on a livestock operation is broad. And we'll talk about the different risk factors and variables that comes into play on a livestock operation. So we are tasked in the health and safety world of trying to design in a better interface. How can we design a workstation or a work environment for that worker to be the most successful? And we try to design out factors in that environment or in the task that degrade human performance. And that also includes the health and safety of the workers. So how do we improve the system? How do we improve a livestock management operation, a livestock management system? And that can include a feedlot, a dairy farm, a turkey operation, a pig farm, whatever it is. There are different tasks involved that are unique to each types of operation and that are also unique to each specific farm. And so a lot of times it's not a one size fits all. Ergonomic interventions and ergonomic approaches have to be very customized to each farming operation. So we try to improve these systems, these farming operations, by designing interfaces between the worker and their workstation to make it more compatible with the task and the user. We try to modify or design environments where the physical demands of the job do not exceed the physical capabilities of the workers. We do not want to put the worker in a situation where we are asking them to do more than what they physically can do, because that sets them up for injuries and also fatalities. We come up with modifications or strategies of changing the work environment to make it safer, more appropriate for the task. We change the task to make it more compatible with the user characteristics and what their physical capabilities are. And we also look at mechanisms to change the way that the work is organized to accommodate a worker's psychological as well as their social needs, which is a growing, it is being recognized as a growing issue among workers and farm owners. So let's talk a little bit about catastrophic events and the role of ergonomics. So I'm going to ask you, is ergonomics all about muscles, aches, and pains? And can ergonomics have a role in catastrophic events? You know, I just pulled a few major catastrophic events in history. Chernobyl going back to 1986, the Air France disaster in 2009, and then Deepwater Horizons more recently in 2010. All of these had ergonomic related issues that contributed to these events. And so the same application or the same thought can be applied as it relates to ergonomics in livestock management operations. So ergo and livestock management, I just pulled some newspaper clippings recently from tragic events in livestock operations. This is upper left-hand corner, Iowa farmer injured by a bull or killed by a bull. Man dies after being attacked by a bull. Gored to death, bull attack. Workers tried saving a man in a pig manure death. Chicken poultry worker drowned in a waste pit. All of these situations, these events on these livestock operations, I would guarantee had some ergonomic related factor that was associated with the event. And so we're going to talk about that briefly later on. So most, if not all, injuries caused by livestock can be prevented. This is the approach that we should be taking. And then also recognize that ergonomic principles can play a role in injury prevention. So let's think about the components and the considerations in livestock systems. And there are a multitude of variables, and this does not include all of them. But obviously we have a worker or a group of workers working in unison or together, managing livestock, doing different tasks. Then obviously we have an animal. It could be a cow, it could be a pig, chicken, turkey, goat. And so those are the two mainstays in a livestock system. We also need to understand that animals have their own behavior. They do not behave and see their environment the same way that a worker does. And so workers need to understand animal behavior. They need to be trained, the worker, on how to predict or how to recognize behavior among animals. And because that their lack of understanding can be a factor that contributes to an unforeseen injury or unfortunately a fatality event. Also on these livestock operations, we have machinery. We have big machinery. We have equipment and we have tools that workers need to understand how to operate. We have structures, we have gates, we have fencing. And then also we have environmental factors, the weather, we have the terrain, temperature. All of these are ergonomic factors that may contribute to the onset of an injury or even a fatality. Now, we have not even discussed illnesses. And we're dealing with the whole H5 situation on dairy farms and then on poultry operations. That's another issue that needs to be addressed, that worker-animal interface and how the possibility of zoonotic disease can be transmitted to the worker or even vice versa from a worker to an animal. And so there's still a lot of research that needs to be done. And we still do not have concrete answers out as to how this high path avian influenza is being transmitted from cow to worker, where it is being transmitted to them on a dairy farm. These are all questions where ergonomics can play a role, how to approach that from an ergonomic perspective, because it's the worker that's interfacing with their work environment, and part of that environment involves a cow or an animal. Okay, so non-fatal work-related musculoskeletal disorders. These are the adverse health effects that arise from repeated exposure to mechanical stresses. Now, historically, we're not talking about those acute injuries like being kicked by a cow or being caught between a cow and a fence. Those are acute, more traumatic type of injuries. And those are probably the ones that you're going to see captured in your workers' compensation system. Those will be the ones where claims are filed. In agriculture, in this working population, they will more than likely report these type of more serious types of injuries. But in the field of ergonomics, we're talking about those repeated cumulative nature type of injuries. And more than likely, the workers in agriculture do not report these aches and pains, musculoskeletal type of injuries, because unfortunately, all too often they think, well, it's just part of the job. It's something that we expect, and that should not be the attitude or the mindset. So work-related musculoskeletal disorders, those include the MSDs, those repetitive strain injuries, repetitive motion, cumulative trauma disorders. All of these are all referring to musculoskeletal disorders. And so in ergonomics, we look at these different risk factors: excessive forces, muscle forces, repeatedly having to exert the muscle in a manner that eventually that muscle begins to break down and you have injury. Awkward postures. That's another leading risk factor that contributes to these types of musculoskeletal disorders. Think about those livestock management tasks that involved awkward postures, such as working in a milking parlor where your workers are oftentimes reaching up to access the udder or put on a milking unit. That is a good example of an awkward posture, or even high repetitions. Again, the best example I can give are milking parlor workers. All too often, these workers are working 8, 10, 12-hour shifts, sometimes 6 days on, only 1 day off, and they are doing the same task in a milking parlor over and over and over. So it's very highly repetitive. And I'm not against 10, 12-hour working shifts. Healthcare industry does it all the time. My wife is a nurse. She worked 12-hour shifts as well. So 12-hour shifts, it's not an issue there, but 6 days on, 1 day off. And I've been on some operations where workers go longer than that without a day off. And so that presents a situation where the body is not being provided sufficient recovery time to recover, restore nutrients in the muscles, and be able to be ready for the next workday. Vibration is another issue. Think about your workers that are operating machinery all day long, your feeders on tractors. A lot of tractors are now equipped with these sophisticated air ride systems that reduce that whole body vibration that's being transmitted to the operator. But I've been on some livestock operations where these tractors are old. They do not have the most modern vibratory abatement systems, and they're being exposed to whole body vibrations. Extreme temperatures, that includes cold, that also includes extreme heat. Both of those are known risk factors for the development of musculoskeletal disorders. Contact stress forces, that can include, the worker being leaning or pushing against different structures like a livestock gate or fencing. Psychosocial factors is recognized as a risk factor for the development of musculoskeletal disorders. Well, what do I mean by that? A lot of these workers, keep in mind, come from they're immigrant workers. They're away from family. They're in a non-Spanish speaking environment. And so a lot of these issues can contribute to depression, emotional issues, being away from family. And so those types of psychosocial issues, we need to be aware of that. We need to recognize that mental health is a big issue that needs to be recognized, and we need to make sure that we are putting workers in a good working environment where we are looking out for their emotional health and well-being. And then also unexpected loads. Whenever I teach my ergonomics class, the example that I give is in the emergency room of a hospital, a drunk patient rolls off a treatment table, and a nurse, out of instinct, tries to catch the worker or the patient. That's an unexpected load. But in a livestock-related environment, think about a large animal like a cow pushing or charging or moving in an unexpected manner. That can contribute to injury as well. So these are all these risk factors that we need to look at these livestock environments and think, what are our workers being exposed to? And how might we come up with solutions to mitigate or reduce these types of exposures? And these risk factors do not operate in isolation. They work in combination. You're never going to have just one risk factor alone. You're going to have several working in cohort that may lead to the development of musculoskeletal disorders. So here's some examples of excessive muscle force, lifting livestock, lifting grain or feed, even performing the strip task on a cow's teat in the milking process. That presents stresses on the forearm flexors. Carpal tunnel syndrome is recognized among dairy parlor milkers. And so these are just examples of excessive muscle force. Look at the different awkward postures. As we look in the environment, as you go out and you look on the farm, look at all your workers, just watch, just observe, and look at the different tasks. And some of these tasks are not, you just can't avoid them, but you want to try to mitigate the repeated exposure of these types of postures. And then repetition. There's the milker here. using different tools, and then, different feeding operations. And so all of these are the big three. If you were to think about the big three ergonomic risk factors, it's high muscle forces, awkward postures, and repetition. Those are the big three ergonomic risk factors. And then here are all the different livestock interactions, the parlor, inside these pig farms, even livestock transporters. This is another opportunity for injury between a worker and the animal. And you can see all of these down here at the bottom. We've got goats and turkeys there in the middle. And then also over here on the right, dairy cows in an alley. I can't tell you how many times I've been called by dairy producers across the country where they have a significant injury or unfortunately a fatality where the worker was in the alley and there was a stampede and they were trampled to death. And so this is, I don't have a solution to this, when this happens, other than workers need to be trained on cow behavior. And then you have to look at how the alley or how the systems are designed, and are workers, do they know where their escape routes are in the event that cows are moving quickly in mass? And so every farm is different, every dairy farm is different. And so it's just one of those things where you have to look at the individual farm and come up with the best solution for that farm. So some of the non-work related risk factors, we have genetic factors among workers or people that lead to musculoskeletal disorders, morphological characteristics. Unfortunately, we are in a country that where obesity is a growing issue. Workers across all industries, this isn't just in agriculture, where workers are not in the best of shape. Their general physical condition is compromised for a number of reasons, which may predispose them or increase their risk for musculoskeletal disorders. Lifestyle habits, whether it's smoking, drinking, or just food choices may also contribute to the development of musculoskeletal disorders. So now let's shift a little bit of our attention or discussion to fatal work injuries, human-machine interactions. Tractors, significant contributor to fatalities in agriculture on livestock operations. Tractor overturns are a big issue. We have other opportunities where workers are presented with increased risk due to their interfaces with different machines. Inside the milking parlor, we have machinery. Outside, we've got gates and fencing. All of these have been associated with fatalities on livestock operations. And then over here on the right, we have a calf bottle feeder trailer. I am starting to see more claims as well as fatalities, unfortunately related to the worker working in close proximity to these moving trailers. We had a worker in, it wasn't in Colorado, maybe 2 years ago, that was run over, that got caught under one of these bottle trailers. And so I've started to look at these. These are moving working platforms. Workers stand on these things as the trailer slowly moves. And so it's interesting. It is something to look at. It is something to keep in mind. Anything where a worker is on that moving trailer, you have to ask the question, what could happen in that situation? So here are some other issues that I want for you to consider as you think about ergonomics on livestock operations. Staffing and manpower. Do you have enough workers performing the task? Or do you have the worker working alone in a high-risk situation? The work shift, higher percentage of injuries and fatalities take place at night. All livestock operations are 24/7 operations, so you need to consider who is working at night. Is there supervision? Do you have workers looking out for one another, the welfare of one another? Do you have a mechanism in place to do that? Another issue is worker fatigue. A fatigued worker is at greater risk for injury as well as compromised or reduced performance. You need to look at the working environments and what you are asking workers to do and determine, are they at greater risk for fatigue? And if so, recognize that they are at greater risk for injury. And then worker training. All workers need to be adequately trained for the job that they are being asked to do. And part of that includes safety training, training regarding machinery, animal behavior, risk hazards associated with whatever they're doing on a livestock operation, the procedures, and then expectations and even role ambiguity. I say all the time, leadership in a business, and that includes livestock operations, if you're wanting a worker to perform at a certain level, they need to understand what the expectation is of them. You cannot expect a worker to be working at a certain level of performance, and that includes working in a safe manner, unless they know what the expectation is. And this is where all businesses, and I'm not talking about agriculture or picking on agriculture, this is where all businesses, I think, can do a better job in effectively training our workers in how to do the job. We need to ask ourselves, are we training them in an effective manner? Are we assessing that they understand? Are they demonstrating safety fluency back to us to give us the confidence and allow us to document that they know how to do the job in a safe manner? We're dealing with, in agriculture, a non-English speaking workforce. And so we need to be cognizant of that we need to be delivering training materials in a non-English speaking context. And so this is where OSHA comes in. And so I don't know if you know about this letter, this interpretive letter that David Michaels, the former OSHA director, put out back in 2010. It's many years ago, but basically saying any training, any safety training that is delivered to workers has to be delivered in a manner that they can understand. That includes in a language that they understand. If a worker cannot read, then you cannot give them reading materials and expect them to understand. You have to provide training in another manner. And so in livestock operations, we're dealing with non-English speaking workers, oftentimes from Mexico or Central America. Are we delivering training in those native languages? Are we assessing their fluency, that they understand? We cannot just rely on them telling us that they understand. We have to have them demonstrate an understanding. We have to document that. So worker training, it needs to include animal behavior, how to properly handle animals with an understanding of how they behave, how they move, how they see their environment. They need to understand emergency procedures in the event, that if a livestock is injured or even if a worker is injured. Authorized tools, what are they authorized and trained to operate with, tools and machinery. And then we need to be documenting safety fluency. And that's more than just, I would argue, that is more than just having them sign that they attended a training session. We need to be documenting either through quizzes or tests, pre-post tests, or even a return demonstration that they are fluent in safety in livestock-related tasks. And then we need to continue to reinforce our workers, making sure that they are up to date with the latest information on the tools, on the machinery, anything related to livestock operations. We need to continue to reinforce that. So I'll stop right there. I went a little bit over. I know I've got 8 more minutes, maybe for questions. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I always provide my cell phone number there. That's because I'm committed to, the ag community. And I know that questions always arise. So please do not hesitate to call me, text me. I have, unfortunately, I have dairy producers, livestock operators across the country that have called me in the event of a fatality. What do I do? Um, and so it's times like that. If you have questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Also, Whitney Pennington is on the call. Please don't hesitate to reach out to High Cause. This is what we do at High Cause. We are there for you in the livestock community, for you to do your job better, for you to operate a productive, profitable business in livestock while at the same time protecting your workers. So I'll stop right there and answer any questions.
While you all are thinking of some questions, potentially, I'm going to start two different polls here. If you could fill those out, that would be great. We'd love to get your feedback on these.
Dave, I have a question for you.
Yep.
One of the questions that I feel like I get often is when we see awkward postures, and of course, hearing you say, like a lot of them are systems level, right? Can we change the environment? Can we change the system first? But sometimes maybe it's someone using a tool incorrectly, or something like that. Do you have any tips on how as managers, as leaders, we can manage that? How do you help teach someone maybe to change their practice or do something in a new way?
It's kind of like you just teed me up on that question, Whitney. My recommendation on that is to ask the workers. The workers oftentimes are the experts in this. And whenever I go out and do inspections or safety walk-arounds and everything, I always ask the workers, okay, how can you do this job better? You tell me, if we had to design this tool differently, how would you design it? What are the issues? The worker has to be involved in, they have to be involved in this problem-solving process. Otherwise, if you just tell them, use this tool this way or to do this task a different way, and if they're not provided any input, you're not going to get acceptance of it. They have to be involved. I would start there. Ask the workers, hey, why is it difficult for you to not use this tool or to do this job in the manner that we are asking you to do? Because a lot of times it could be the way that you're asking them, you may be putting more stress on the worker, and it may not be the right way to do it. And so to answer your question, I would ask them to start that process. And then if they say that the tool or the task is, it's just not working for me, then you need to start down the path of let's figure out a way to do this differently.
All right, thanks for everybody filling out those polls. I'll leave the last one up for just a little bit longer here to get everybody's answers in. And then thank you so much, David. We really appreciate your wonderful presentation today, really informative, and I think will help a lot of our members be able to implement these practices on a day-to-day operation. If anybody, like he said, if anybody has any questions for him, feel free to reach out. If you didn't get that contact information and would like it later on, feel free to reach out to myself, and we will certainly be happy to get you that information here. Share my screen one more time here. All right. Our next presentation is by Whitney Pennington, who is the outreach lead for High Plains Intermountain Center for Agricultural Health and Safety, or HICAS. We're really looking forward to this presentation on heat illness prevention on agricultural operations, as this is really prevalent with rules that went into place a few years ago, and making sure that that is continually something on your guys' minds as we approach the warmer weather here. Thank you all.
Thanks, Brittany. As I get started, I will share my screen as well to do that. Good morning. It's good to see many of your names. in the participant list today. Many of you have likely seen or heard me speak before, so it's a pleasure to see you again. If we have not had the chance to meet, I look forward to meeting you in person sometime. Like Dave, I am a member of our High Plains Intermountain Center for Ag Health and Safety team. I'm physically located at CSU in the Fort Collins area. And my role, unlike Dave's, which really focuses on research, my role is more on the education side. So how do we take the information that we've gathered, the research that we've done, and how do we roll that into practices or education or tools or things that you all can use, your workers can use to actually stay safe on the job. And so where Dave talked about his history and his partnership with livestock injury, one of the places that I serve and go to a lot is actually this heat illness space, but more so with the fruit and veg producers and the orchard fruit arena. So I've done my best to sort of take some of what we've learned and the work we've done in that space and think about how it might relate to you all. But that's just to say, this is just my starting ideas and would love to continue this conversation more in the future. And if you think I'm, not on the mark, I'd love to get that feedback too, to know what you think works best for you. So our topics and our goals today is to learn a little bit about heat-related illness and risk factors for heat-related illness. As Brittany mentioned, then we're going to frame that with prevention around the Colorado heat rules and compliance, and then I'll leave you with some closing ideas. Please do use the chat and the Q&A box to put questions, comments, concerns in as we go. Brittany's going to help me watch for that. I like to answer questions as they come up, or else put things in a parking lot to get to at the end. I think Dave left me with maybe a few extra minutes, so I'm going to use those up. So to get us onto the same page a little bit, even though Dave already did that for us, I always start my presentations with some value statements around why health and safety matters. Not that you have to agree with me on all of these, but I hope that one of them speaks to you at least on why you're here and why you chose to either participate in the safety group or why you chose to come to this session today. The first and most basic is that health and safety matters because people matter. People deserve health and safe work, and they deserve to go home from work in the same condition that they arrived at work in. Also, as Dave has already covered, there is a business case to be made about investing in health and safety, and that's in particular that these investments can pay off in terms of our productivity, our efficiency, right? Healthy people, safe people, happy people are all more productive, and people who are sick or who are miss work, that lowers our productivity and is a cost to our business. And finally, we're learning more and more that particularly for us in Colorado, consumers are also interested and our customers are interested in the worker treatment and the pay of the people who are growing, harvesting their food. And this comes from a survey that's conducted by Colorado State University and the Colorado Department of Ag back in 2022 that looked at people all over the state of Colorado, urban, suburban, and rural folks about what factors they're looking at when they choose their food and choose different products in the grocery store or whatever market they're using. Finally, yes, we can acknowledge that individuals have responsibility for the choices that they make. But again, as Dr. Douphrate was painting for us, we as managers, as business owners, have a lot of control and have the responsibility to create an environment where safety is prioritized, where safety is important, and then shape our employees' decisions in a way that those decisions that are in the best interest of safety and health are easy to make, and that they have the support and the knowledge and the skills to make those safe choices and also to report when things maybe aren't as safe as they could be. So we're going to move into talking about heat illness, and this is just my reminder to myself and to you and to apologize that I will use all of these words interchangeably, but they mean the same thing. Heat illness is the same as heat-related illness, which is abbreviated as HRI, and you're going to see those all on screen. So apologies in advance for that. But why are we talking about heat? Well, that's because, no surprise to you, heat in particular is particularly impactful on our agricultural work. It's not surprising to hear that between 2000 and 2010, the rate of occupational heat-related death was 35 times higher in agriculture than it was for all other industries. And traditionally, we assume that most of this impact is in the crop space, which it is. It has a big impact in crops. More than 65 workers have died in the last 20 years, specifically in crop production. But I hope to convey to you and share with you on these risk factors that there are things that absolutely apply to livestock as well. And moreover, we know that heat illness cases, both those related to work and those related just to the general public, they increase with temperature, and our global temperatures are rising. The last 10 years or so have all been some of the warmest years on record. And so we have concern about those cases as we experience hot temperatures across the globe. So heat-related illness, what is it? Well, our bodies, we are actually exposed to two different kinds of heat. We have the heat from the environment. That's what we typically think of, air temperature, sunlight, humidity, right? But we also have the heat that we as individuals create within our own bodies. Our muscles put out energy, they put out heat when we do physical activity, and we call that the metabolic heat. So these two things combined on our body are the net load of heat that we experience, and we call that heat stress. Our body's physiologic response to sort of keep up with that heat to try to maintain our ideal temperature of 98.6, that's called heat strain. So that's when our pulse increases, when we start to sweat, when our circulation increases, that's all heat strain. And when these two things become out of balance, when there's more heat, environmental and metabolic heat, than our body can actually tolerate, that's when we spill over into the things that we call heat-related illnesses. And heat-related illnesses is actually a whole suite or a whole host of different things, but there are two that are incredibly serious: heat exhaustion, which can transform into heat stroke, which is a medical emergency and can lead, unfortunately, to death. And while there are many risk factors, which we're going to go over, one of the main ones and the most consistent ones that we see is being dehydrated and not having consumed enough water, leading to these kinds of conditions. So heat exhaustion, what does it look like? The symptoms for heat exhaustion: dizziness, headache, sweaty skin, weakness, cramps, nausea and vomiting, and fast heartbeat. What we want people to do if they're experiencing heat illness or any of these symptoms is to stop working immediately. We want them to inform their supervisor that they're not feeling well. And then we want them to take a break, stop working, go to the shade or an indoor cooled area, and drink small sips of water. So the idea here is that with this water, shade, rest protocol that we use, the framework we use for heat illness prevention and for intervening, the shade and the rest part are intervening directly on those two sources of heat. We had that environmental heat, so we want to get out of the environment or get out of a hot environment. So that's shade or inside. And then the rest part, stopping doing physical work, means we're going to stop producing that metabolic heat. We're going to keep our muscles from producing any more heat in our body. So that's why both of those pieces are important. So heat exhaustion can quickly progress to heat stroke, which the symptoms of heat stroke are red, hot, dry skin, high temperature, confusion, convulsions, and fainting. We often will say if someone's not acting like themselves, talking to themselves, muttering to themselves, that's one of the common things that people report about people experiencing heat stroke. This is a medical emergency. right? And so in these cases, we want these sorts of things to be reported absolutely immediately, especially when we're talking about field work, harvesting work out on fruit and vegetable. When we say the first thing that you want to do is report to someone, either if you see someone who has these symptoms or someone tells you they have these symptoms, don't, wait, literally start screaming, say, hey, someone is not feeling well. Like that is the first thing that you need to do because it is a medical emergency. So the person who has the responsibility of responding, in this case, a supervisor, a crew lead, maybe it's an office lead, right? That person in this moment, if it's a medical emergency, is going to be the one responsible for calling 911 and for following whatever protocol you have in place for helping medical services get to wherever you are. While that is happening simultaneously, others can be helping this person to cool off. So that means, if possible, moved to the shade or an indoor environment, or shade is set up over them. To the extent possible, removing their outer layers. If they're wearing an extra sweatshirt, a jacket, or multiple shirts, take off the outer layer. The person should be cooled by fanning them and spraying or sponging cold water on their neck or directly onto their skin. And if they're alert enough and awake, they can be sat up and given small sips of water. But for someone who is unconscious, you never want to try pouring water into their mouth. And perhaps most importantly is we're not leaving this person alone. We never want to leave someone alone who's experiencing any of these serious symptoms because they can quickly progress and lead to death. So then what do we do about this? How do we prevent? Well, we use that, the 3-word framework I already introduced was water, rest, and shade. That is the prevention system, if you will, that we use and remember because it's easy to remember. But there's actually one more piece to that, and that is acclimatization. So acclimatization is our body's process of getting used to working in a specific environment, specifically in the heat. We get really great and awesome adaptations to keeping ourselves cooler and running more efficiently, which is cool that we can build up that capability, but it does take time to develop, and it is not a process where if you just go and work and break yourself for one day and then you're going to be great for the rest of the season. That's not actually how it works. You build this tolerance over the course of 2 weeks, actually, and so you should be gradually working out in the heat. For example, today is a great example. On the Front Range, it's supposed to be 80 degrees. It's going to be our hot day, though it has been leading up to that over the last few days. You do not want to go out and work, a hard 8-hour, 10-hour shift today, and then think, now the rest of the summer I'll be fine because I broke myself in. That's not how it works. The other processes, as we were talking about, the other prevention strategies, drinking enough water, and specifically not waiting until you're thirsty to drink water. Water is what helps our organs function. Water is what produces the liquid that we sweat to keep us cool. We also want to prevent overheating. That's why going to the shade and intervening on the environmental heat is important, and taking a break and stopping doing the physical work and stopping our metabolic heat. And then finally, as Dave also alluded to, resting and cooling down at night, of getting the rest and recovery in order for our bodies to repair so that they can work hard again the next day. This means taking a shower after work, taking rest, keeping drinking water, limiting the intake of alcohol and alcohol and coffee, and then sleeping in a cool, dark place to the extent that is possible. There are some environmental risk factors. So this is where I hope that you will recognize that it's not just fruit and veg space where people are at risk. It is actually many different occupations, including some jobs and tasks in livestock work. So there are all the things related to the weather and the environment that we're experiencing. So high temperature increases the risk, high humidity increases the risk, direct sunlight, which is a big one for us here in Colorado, given that we get a lot of direct sunlight. We get a lot of those direct UV rays being at altitude. And then there's wind, and we're specifically thinking about the high risk of a hot wind. So when it's breezy and the wind is hotter, the air temperature is hotter than our skin temperature, you've probably all experienced this before. It feels like an oven. So rather than being cooling, it's actually heating us up. And that's the particular condition that we're concerned about. And then there are also risk factors related to the way that we do the work. So specifically how hard you're working, how long you're working can increase your risk. Wearing thick or protective clothing, wearing a lot of layers, wearing dark colored layers, wearing really tight clothing. All of those things can increase risk, as well as wearing personal protective equipment or PPE, anything with a vapor barrier, splash proof, respirator on the face, even goggles, anything that prevents our skin from sweating, from getting that air over our sweaty skin to help lift off some of our body heat. PPE prevents us from doing that. And so that's why it's increasing our risk. And then there are risk factors related to each individual. I already just talked about acclimatization, but someone's acclimatization status, whether they've been acclimated or not, is a personal risk factor. In fact, that we know across occupations, when it comes to heat-related illness, about 80% of heat-related illness cases occur during a worker's first 2 weeks on the job. During that period when they're not acclimated, because perhaps they're not drinking enough water, they're working too hard, their body hasn't been given time to adjust, and they push themselves over the edge. Other individual factors include age, specifically old age, someone's overall health status, so having a chronic disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, and being pregnant, all of those increase risk. Someone's water consumption or lack thereof, so being in a state of being dehydrated, increases risk. And then the use of drugs and medicines that can interfere with heat, like alcohol and caffeine, things that dehydrate us. We call those diuretics. Even some medicines can dehydrate you, can affect your heart rate, and predispose you and put you at higher risk. So we always recommend talking to pharmacists about new drugs that you receive and whether those are going to impact you in the heat. I used to work at Poison Control and used to work with a bunch of pharmacists. So I am one of those people that when the pharmacist gives me that giant legal size paper with all the tiny print of everything that could go wrong, I actually read it because my colleagues taught me that that was important. And there are things that I need to know on there. So making that a practice for you and for those of us who are English speakers and readers and can read that can be something that can help us. All right, so that is our background on heat-related illness or heat illness in general. I want to give just a second for any questions that have come up now. Let you type those in before I just move on. Right, I'm not seeing any. So I'm going to keep going. So we're going to frame prevention now around the heat illness regulation in Colorado. And I'm going to go over this at a very kind of 30,000 foot level. If you are a CLA member and you have handy, I'm going to butcher the name of it, but I know that CLA produces for you a compliance guide. This information is in your compliance guide too. So if you have that handy, you might crack that open so you can follow along or look at that, or know that if you have that resource somewhere that is available for you later. So I'm going to go over the heat rules, which are contained within the Colorado Ag Labor Conditions Rules. These rules were established by the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment as part of the passing of that Senate Bill 2187. That's where the overtime rules and a lot of other things came from. The heat rules have been in effect since May of 2022. And the specific pieces you need to be aware of and what this prompts is as follows. Agricultural employers have to monitor the outdoor and indoor temperature, specifically looking at a threshold temperature of 80 degrees. At that temperature threshold, employers need to provide drinking water, provide shade, maintain effective communication for the purposes of monitoring people for heat-related illness signs and symptoms, and be able to respond and have proper and immediate response to any cases of heat illness, be that making people rest and stop working or calling emergency medical services. You also need to provide training annually to your workforce on heat illness prevention. And finally, there are some additional increased risk conditions, some times when the state has outlined that the risk is especially high, and they're going to ask you to implement a few more things to do for prevention, and we'll cover those too. So before I go into a little bit more detail and start talking about compliance, I wanted just to remind you that this standard applies to all agricultural employers. That is how it is written. And so you are obligated to comply with this standard, but I'm going to go over the minimum requirements. I am not a lawyer at all, and I'm not your lawyer. So this is not legal advice. This is compliance education, but we'll do the best I can if you have questions. If not, I will refer you to CDLE for questions that I cannot answer. And I also want to remind you, again, we're going over the minimum, and I'm going to talk in very generalized terms, but that compliance and what it looks like to implement these rules in your business, at your operation, is going to vary because every operation is different. So depending on the size of your crew, the type of work people are doing, the environment that they're in, the PPE they have to wear, how long they're working, right? All of these things impact what people's risks are and what it looks like to implement these rules. So do keep that in mind, that there is a little work that you have to do on your part to think through and process, what does this look like in my operation? So the first thing that I mentioned, and we're going to go sort of line by line in the rule here, is monitoring temperature. And it's indoor and outdoor temperature. And we're looking for that temperature when it's outside to either be or be forecasted at least 80 degrees, and inside to also be at least 80 degrees. So outdoor temperature is pretty easy. You can use any sort of forecast tool that exists, National Weather Service, mass media, apps. It's relatively easy to get a weather forecast these days, specifically one that's geolocated, thanks to our handy dandy computers that go with us everywhere in our pockets. I think that the indoor side of things might be a little more complicated for some of you all, depending on what type of livestock facilities you have and whether those are indoor or semi-indoor. But what the law says in terms of what does it mean to monitor the indoor temperature, you have two ways that you can monitor. You can either set up your own measurement tool or device, which you might already have to monitor temperature or status for your livestock, or you can go by what they define as reasonably expecting that the temperature is that high. And some cases that you might reasonably expect the temperature to be that high are because you're actively heating the space or you're doing something that causes the temperature to go up. You have reason to assume that because the outdoor temperature is high and you have an indoor unventilated space, that the inside temperature is then warm, or that you have measured in the last 3 days that indoor space has been at least 80 degrees, and so you have reason to expect that it is still that high. If you are using a forecast for your outdoor temperature to make determinations of what you need to provide, say, for tomorrow, and saying, hey, okay, do I need to provide water and extra shade tomorrow? I'm going to look at the forecast. Today is Thursday, right? And it is before noon on Thursday. So if I was going to be making preparations for my crews for tomorrow, I wouldn't be able to do that yet because it is not yet noon. And I can tell you, I was just looking at the forecast on National Weather Service. For some of us on the Front Range, tomorrow's temperature is going to be above 80 degrees, right? So maybe something to start planning and thinking about now. We're already hitting our warm time of year. Some other ideas in terms of apps. This is a picture on the screen of the OSHA NIOSH heat safety tool, which is it's just a more specific weather forecasting app specifically put out by OSHA and NIOSH. So in addition to having the temperature, it has some heat illness prevention things built right into it. But I did want to alert you to something super specific, which is that this particular app has 2 temperatures on it. And you will see that more and more now on any sort of app or forecast that you see what we call dry bulb temperature, or the temperature from a thermometer, as well as heat index, which is a calculated temperature, a feels like temperature based on the combination of the actual temperature and the humidity. So in this app, the upper left, the yellow circle, is our dry bulb temperature. It says 85 in this picture. And the bigger number, the 86 over the orange precautions box, that's actually the heat index. But that heat index is not the threshold temperature that we're supposed to use in Colorado. We're supposed to use the dry bulb temperature. Most weather apps, when you open them, the big temperature that you see is actually the dry bulb temperature and not the heat index, but you'll want to pay attention to that. You could also choose to set up your own device or your own monitor, and I'll show a couple options of that on the next page. You might already do that. And then throughout, you're going to see me for all these compliance ideas say assign as a duty and use a log, which I know is not going to be popular. Documentation, it draws a fine line between helping you achieve something and being a burden. And I acknowledge and understand that. What I mean here is if you need in your process to make sure it gets done, it needs to be someone's job duty. And if for you or for them to make the determination that it does get done, is there need to be some sort of check-off process? I'm not saying someone needs to be marking down the temperature all the time. I'm saying, is it a line that says check temperature, check, done, right? So just think about that for your systems and your process. Is that a tool that works for you, or is it not something that's necessary? Here are some options for monitoring your own temperature. I put indoors in quotes just to highlight that depending on the structure of your barns and what you have, your sort of indoor / quasi-indoor environments, but it actually doesn't really matter what's defined as indoor or outdoor because you have to measure them all, no matter what it is, or you have to keep track of them all, or know that they're all under or over 80 degrees no matter what. So these are some different products that are on the market that you could purchase to measure and monitor the temperature anywhere on your property at your facility. And these range from super duper expensive. The farthest left, that red box, is a really expensive tool. You don't need that. Two things you can buy on Amazon, like that middle one, it's a Bluetooth weather station, right? So you can put those couple different monitors somewhere in a couple different locations and keep track of those in one space. Or on screen here, I have Kestrel Drop. I know that our colleagues in Nebraska have used these on several feedlots. In Nebraska, they're an environmental sampler, so you could pin them in a specific location, or you could, a person could wear them. And then 8 of these at a time will talk to a dashboard. And so we'll give you live real-time weather updates. And there are different versions and different models, but I think the most basic one starts at about $80. So lots of options for you if you want to make that kind of investment. So after we've hit that threshold temperature, or we've monitored for 80 degrees or higher, that sets us off into having to do a few things. One is provide drinking water. I think most of you probably already do this because you have a tap. You have an indoor environment where people can go and take a break and get water, or you have other taps located across your property. So I do think this is probably pretty easy for you. However, if you are in a spot or people are having to go places where they have to take their own water, know that they have to have 32 ounces per hour on them. That it can be refilled. So if someone's going out for a couple of hours, but they're coming back, they can rely on the fact that they know they'll be able to refill. The water has to be cool, and that's specifically defined as 60 degrees or colder. It has to be close by, which is within a quarter mile if someone is only on foot, which I think probably does not affect a lot of you because we have cars, trucks, ATVs, horses that people are using to get around. And so if people have another means other than just walking to get somewhere, you don't have to be as concerned with how close or how far away they are from water at all times. The water has to be from a sanitary source. That just means it has to be clean, good, healthy water. And then they have to be given time to drink it, or they can't be asked not to take a break to drink water. From the compliance work that's been done in the last year by the state, one thing that they aren't looking at in terms of what it means to be sanitary means that everyone also has to have a means of actually drinking it and having their own cup. So if you're providing water, you should also have cups available such that every person can have their own cup. Otherwise, it's not deemed as sanitary. In the fruit and veg space, one thing I've seen that's efficient for keeping things cold out in the field, if you're taking coolers or those giant jugs of water, is buying a block of ice, a solid block, as compared to cubes, because that solid block stays cold longer, it takes longer to melt. One thing to think about, the water at my house out of my tap is actually not even 60 degrees, it's warmer than that. So if that's the case, do you have ice, sanitary ice available that people could put in their water to make the water cooler if they had to? Do you need to supply bottled water? Do you want to supply sports drinks? And then, like everything, like I said, making sure that water is available somewhere that's not at a tap if that you deem your property is big enough and people are working in a way that they need to get water where they're really far away from the office or for the break room or from a tap. Whose responsibility is that? That should be assigned in their duties. And this can be a shared responsibility, especially making sure the water jug gets filled and taken with and then emptied and cleaned and dried when you get back. That responsibility especially can be shared among team members. So you also have to provide shade. Shade can be artificial or natural. Natural means like a tree. Artificial means someplace inside, a picnic shelter, an umbrella, pop-up tent. Like water, this is defined as being as close as practical to the work site, which is a 1/4 mile away for anyone who is on foot only. So someone isn't having to walk more than about 3 minutes to get to someplace shady to take a break. It should be away from a heat source. That means it should be away from someplace that's actively heated, a furnace, any sort of vent that's drawing hot air out, running machines are all heat sources. Should be sufficiently large such that it accommodates everyone comfortably, and then that there are safe, healthy, and sanitary conditions, this is probably the hardest thing to think about, which is why I have it in bold, but I'm going to talk about it in these next 2 slides with some pictures. These are, I understand, more fruit and veg oriented, more field work oriented, but both of these pictures show shade that is not compliant. In that, on the left, that blue umbrella is covering 2 workers, but there's a 3rd worker there in white who's not actually in the shade. So that would be that shade is not sufficiently large. It is also in close proximity to those blue porta potties. And the number one issue that CDLE found last year in terms of enforcement of shade was that a lot of times workers were saying they didn't want to use the shade that was provided because it was often adjacent to the bathroom. So it was smelly, it was uncomfortable, and it was not a place that was suitably restful to make them want to go and use it. So Dave mentioned this idea of solutions are often found within work crews themselves. So again, I would advise the same thing. If you have shade or you're trying to implement shade or know you need to maybe set up a shade structure outside of just your office space because your property is that large, use your employees to get their feedback on what they want to see and what they would actually use. And then on the right is a flatbed truck. In this picture, the only shade that is there is under the truck itself. So even if it was a break where that truck was off, we would not consider shade under a vehicle to be considered safe. So they would need to have some sort of other pop-up structure, or there would need to be a canopy on that truck on the top of it that provided shade. So for you all, again, as I've said, I think that you probably already have sufficient artificial shade on your property. You have an indoor environment somewhere. And so how are you making this area appealing? How are you making it useful and suitable and a place that employees know they can and should and want to go and use? If you have that big property where you maybe need to consider, we probably should put some shade somewhere else just so folks don't have to walk all the way back here. Is there a canopy that needs to be added to equipment, or do you need to put up a shade structure, either something permanent in a central location like a picnic shelter, or I've seen a farm that some telephone poles and then they strung like a canvas canopy up on those telephone poles, and that created shade in a central location. Or is there like pop-up tents? Like this picture is of our research team from a couple summers ago down in Pueblo. We knew it was going to be really hot, so I packed this pop-up tent for us, and you can see everyone fits comfortably under there. Or is there something you can pull that's more of a fruit and veg kind of setting, but just different things you can think about of what shade actually could look like. Or maybe you have trees on your property, big trees, and so you know that there is sufficient shade under them at all times of the day, especially at peak time at noon when the sun is straight down. That's when shade is usually the smallest. So just assuring that all those things do exist for you. You also have to have effective communication. So the purposes of having effective communication is so that you can verify people's well-being and you can receive reports if someone's not feeling well, and then call out to emergency medical services. And effective communication just means something, be it voice, be it looking and observing, or be it some other electronic means, texting, some sort of internal system you have for communication. So make sure to confirm your cell service. Know if there are parts of your property that you don't have good cell service where you might need to rely on something else. Basically everywhere other than the US, people communicate on WhatsApp, in Europe and Central and South America. And so maybe you need to have a WhatsApp group contact for everyone. Have a designated crew contact who is the person to report up to and make sure everyone knows who that person is. And particularly if you know your cell service is spotty, is there someone, I say office staff, but someone who has a landline somewhere who can be relied upon to guaranteed to be able to make a call out? And does that person know that it could be their responsibility to be sort of that last line of cloud or that last line of emergency contact because they're always available or always present or always at a place that can make a call out? You have, again, that effective communication to be able to receive and monitor signs and symptoms. The rule defines these compliance ideas. It says monitoring could be observation by a supervisor of people as they're working, but it limits that as 20 people at a time. So if you have a crew of more than 20, you will need to have more than one supervisor with this responsibility, and they'll need to know who it is that they're actually supervising. You could implement a mandatory buddy system where no one is ever working alone. And so the two people know and are aware they're supposed to be looking out for these signs and symptoms and reporting and getting medical help when someone does have signs or symptoms. So for people who are working alone, maybe machine operators, maybe for those of you who are cow-calf and you have someone doing irrigation, how are you communicating with them? How are you monitoring them is something to think about. And you have the latitude to define some other effective means for staying in touch with them. You know, maybe it's that they're always texting you when they've completed a task or when they're moving field to field. This field is done, now I'm going here. That's that contact so that you know that they're feeling okay and they're still awake and conscious and doing their work. Or maybe you have some other digital tool or log you're already using that tracks that people check off when they're done with tasks. You're doing all of this so that you can have the proper and immediate response to people who have signs and symptoms. The proper and immediate response is defined as allowing employees to initiate their own breaks if they have a sign or symptom, or your supervisors, those people who are monitoring folks, when they see those, they can also require employees to stop working and take a break. People should be monitored during their break and checked on. Those breaks should be at least 10 minutes long. And then they're monitored so that if the situation elevates and they become confused or slurring their speech, or they faint, or they become unconscious, that you can contact medical emergency services immediately. Compliance for this is really all about whose role is what. Defining in an emergency situation who's going to do what, who's going to call, who's going to act, who's going to help EMS get to the right location. As you are likely aware, in emergency situations, we go to our lizard brain. We forget a lot of what's going on and we get really stressed. And so having this assigned ahead of time, having it practiced really and talked through so that people are really solid and sure of what their roles are, will make it go smoother and make sure it happens in the appropriate way. I would also advise, for those of you with large properties, can you make a sort of in-house map with location descriptions, GPS address coordinates for the different parts of your property? Because if you are out in XYZ pen and someone experiences heat stroke, but your address is your gate that is a mile away, is there a better location or a more specific location you can give to EMS to get them to the person rather than just coming to the one address at your gate? Super important for our rural communities to help shorten that time that it takes for EMS to respond, is being able to have better and more accurate location descriptions than we need in our suburban and urban areas. The training requirement is for, oh, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to push through these last few things. The training requirement is for annual training on topics related to heat illness prevention and the rules, what rights people have under the rules. Some of that may be done in writing, but it also must be done verbally in the language that people speak and use. And then your supervisors, if they're responsible for monitoring temperature or getting water out there, they need to be trained on those roles. Dave talked about that a lot. This training has to be completed by the 20th of April every year, or if you're hiring people after that date, they have to be trained like during their orientation before you send them out to work in the heat. Lucky for you, we have resources in this area. I'm going to try to pull up my link for you. We adapted actually from California a training script. So it's 5 different short units. It takes about 45 minutes to an hour, and it's something you can read. It has all the content that you need to know and share. It has prompting questions. It has visual aids. It has discussions for you to be able to conduct a effective training on heat-related illness. And those training guides are available in both English and Spanish. And when that training is done, as well as that ag labor rights poster, which your CLA team has helped you, I know, make sure you have all those posters. When those two things are used together, you do meet all of the training requirements and you're in compliance with the Colorado law when you do it every year. If you are thinking, yeah, I don't really know that I know enough about this topic to do this, I'm a little scared, I need some more background, I need some more information, I've got you covered. We are doing free workshops on how to use that specific training tool. You hear it, you get to experience a mock training as if you were my employee, and then we go over in a little more detail a lot of the content that you've heard today. I will say, readily admit that the content of that script is a little more tailored to fruit and veg, but I think at least 80 to 90% of it applies to everyone, no matter what. So that last 10% where you maybe need to finagle a sentence about where water is, where shade is, how you want people to take breaks, right? You will have to adapt and change that for your specific production and your operation, but you would have to do that anyway. So if you want to be able to do training better at your operation, I would invite you to come attend one of the 2 we have left. They're on Zoom in English, April 9th and the 29th, and then there are Spanish. So if you have a crew leader who's going to lead your training for your team, they could come and learn it in Spanish on either April 8th or the 24th. That link that I just put in the chat has all of our resources as well as the registration link to one of those workshops. Finally, there are some increased risk conditions. If it's really hot, if the air quality is bad, if folks are working long hours, if they're wearing vapor barriers or PPE, so maybe your parlor workers, or if they are unacclimated, so it's during the first 4 days of work when it is also over 80 degrees. The main thing here that changes is that your break frequency needs to increase to 10 minutes every 2 hours instead of every 4 hours. That's a mandatory break. You or your supervisors also need to do reminders of people of what their rights are. As simple as this: hey y'all, it's gonna be extra hot today, or there's poor air quality today, so we're at higher risk of heat illness. So I want you to remember that if you are feeling sick, you can take a break at any time, let your supervisor know, and we'll relieve you of your duties so you can protect yourself. Make sure you're drinking water. Make sure you're looking out for your coworkers today. Thank you. Have a great day. Right? As simple as that is what you need to be doing to provide those extra reminders. So thank you so much. That is the end of what I have. Just prompting you to reflect on what you did last year. Are there things that you can improve? Now is the time to plan. Actually, now is the time to implement. Today and tomorrow is going to start being 80 degrees. If you thought what I had to say was not relevant, was not right for you, talk to your neighbor. What are they doing? Talk to someone else you see here. You could call Dave. That's fine with me. He definitely knows more about livestock and dairy environments than I do. So use him for that, or use me. I have fruit and veg producers call me all the time and say, hey, this isn't working. What should I do instead? We talk about it, try to figure it out. And then finally, make sure you are documenting at least what your protocol is. What are your plans, and what are the duties that folks are taking care of? And make sure you record when you do your training and who attended and have them sign off. This is my contact information. Like Dave, please reach out to me, and I'd be happy to discuss or take feedback or talk through different concerns that you have, or send you over to CDLE for more robust compliance stuff that I can't answer.
Feel free to put any questions in the chat here. I'm gonna open another poll if you all wouldn't mind filling that out. I know we're just about to time here, but go ahead and do that and put any questions you have in the chat or the Q&A function for today. Thank you all so much for attending. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Whitney, for the wonderful presentation on some really relevant information that is going to be applicable to our members coming up here quickly. It seems how April 1st is on Tuesday, and those deadlines are coming up quickly. If anybody wants to reach out to us, feel free to do that as well. Also, one quick thing. If you could put in the chat for us your answer to these two questions, that would be also really greatly appreciated. That way we can make sure that we're providing the most important trainings to you, and then also wanting to know whether or not you feel like you could apply what you learned today on your operation. With that, that would be all we have for you today. Thank you all so much. Again, if you are wanting to receive credit for the CLA safety group and you have not put your name and business name in the chat, please go ahead and do so. That way we can get you the correct credit. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Toby, for your feedback. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for all your feedback, everyone. Oh, Howard, you got a question for us? You're able to unmute and talk whenever you are ready.
Hi, 109 feeders. Just wondered where we needed to sign in.
Yeah, feel free to put that in the chat for us. Just put that you're Howard Miller, and then you're here for 109 feeders. And I'll also make a note as well on my end too. With that, everybody's more than welcome to leave whenever they're ready to get back to the rest of their day. But thank you all again so much, and I really appreciate all the wonderful feedback and your time today.
Brittany, it looks like you might be sending out a reminder to everyone that you guys made those cattle handling videos.
Yes, I was
That's
just
what
thinking
everyone
about that too.
want.
And that'll work out well. Maybe we'll do one training here where we just kind of review that training.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, that just echoes the importance of that training that High
I know,
Cost gave us a grant for. So we're really excited about that. But yes, for anybody that maybe didn't remember, we do have a training for animal handling that is on YouTube. So you're more than welcome to watch that at any time. And then, yeah, we'll potentially maybe later this year look at one of the safety trainings we provide for credit is watching those videos.